Hi, my name is Laura, and this is my story. My story is actually a love story between God and me. It started off the day I was born, to a mom who had already given birth to two other rambunctious boys, and that God had blessed her with a baby girl. I was always the light of her eye, the joy of her heart, and the comedic relief within the family. Being that baby sister was a treat for me, having two older brothers to protect, to guide me, to show me how to be a proper athlete and to hold my own in any conversation that I had growing up. I was just truly blessed. My parents decided to divorce when I was a senior in high school, and that was not a surprise per se, but it still was hard. I had already started dating the man that would be my first husband. So in one sense, mentally, emotionally, I was already moving forward with my life. I knew that my mom had been unhappy. And so when she said she needed to leave, I understood. We were not really raised in a Christian home. My mother's side, my grandmother was a very strong Christian from the stories that were told to me. We went to church until I was in second grade, and then my father lost interest. So we became more of what a lot of people would term as creasters. We went at Christmas because my father loved the candlelight services on Christmas Eve, and we were there at Easter to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. From second grade until really middle school, I had no formal church upbringing. We didn't read the Bible at home. It was in our house though, and I did myself in my quiet times. It was like God was always reaching for me. Those days as you're growing up, we all have them, where you're sitting alone, you're feeling sad, or you're feeling like something is missing. I tended to go to my bookshelf that I had in my room, and I would grab the children's Bible, and I'd open it up, and it was just rich and glorious. Had beautiful illustrations. The stories of the patriarchs of the Old Testament were just written out there for me, and it just seemed like I couldn't get enough. I would find myself drawn to that in those quiet times when I just felt I needed something more. I recall one night at a sleepover with a girlfriend when I was in fifth grade, and I asked her if she was afraid of dying, and she'd never even thought of the topic. She was like, what? You know what? But I had this desire to understand, and was this life it? Was anything gonna happen when I died? I was searching. And so when I was in junior high, I had a neighborhood girlfriend that invited me to Christian camp, Forest Home, up in the hills of California. And I went with her, and it was like all of the things that I had learned, the things that I had read, it was all coming together for this one moment. And it was like God had been carrying me to that moment where I would attend this camp, I would hear the gospel, and I would get it, and I would understand. And at that camp, I accepted Jesus into my heart. And I was 14 years old. I wrote this very lengthy note home to my mom about how excited I was. I found it amongst her things many years later, which touched my heart, because when I got home, she sat me down to discuss my letter, because again, I was 14, and the family wasn't going to change what they were doing or what they weren't doing on the weekends. And so she had no desire to block me from my own spiritual journey, discovering God, but they were not going to begin going back to church again. The process was, you know what, when you're 16 and you start driving, if you want to go to church on Sunday, go right ahead. So I had my permission, and yet because of my age, I also had restrictions on what was happening. So I had other friends that attended a local church, so I would do the special events, the Christmas things. A couple of times I did things with the youth group, but basically I was kind of let go. Here I had made the most important decision in my life, which was to recognize Jesus as Lord and Savior, to invite him into my heart, to be Lord. and I had no follow-up. I just continued on with the things that I had done, what I knew how to do, walked again on my own with the Lord, side by side. A year later, ninth grade, I was having some issues with my hands. A finger would inflame. Then on the next morning, the other fingers on the other hands would inflame, and the previous fingers were fine. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I thought maybe I jammed my hand at basketball or something. This one morning I was going up the stairs and both of my knees began to swell. So much so that they were about the size of grapefruits. I could hardly move. Back down, talked to the school nurse. She called my mom. She made an appointment for me with a doctor. They took one look at me and they're like, we don't know what the heck is going on. Blood work began, different hypotheses. Basically, after a period of time, it came down to the fact that I had contracted juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, potentially from a vaccine that I had taken 2-3 months prior. That day changed my life. 20 some odd years dealing with the effects of a diagnosis that as juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, it's only supposed to last maybe 3 years. I was 38 before it was no longer detectable in my blood. At that moment, everything in my world changed. I could no longer run. I had to get around from class to class on crutches. Understandably, my friends were freaking out. They one day saw this young, vivacious, joyful, happy-go-lucky person overnight literally age and change. They didn't understand, I didn't understand. And when you have something like that, especially at 15, usually you draw back. And that's exactly what happened. All of the kids that I had grown up with, which I felt so blessed to be a part of, going through elementary through high school with the same group of kids, they started leaving me out. They started doing things that didn't include me. They didn't know how to interact with me anymore. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know if what I had could be contagious somehow. There was just fear that began to settle in, just kind of carrying on with life as if I wasn't there. I took the hint and I stopped sitting with the group. When I finally made it to the lunch grass area, I would just sit nearby, but I didn't sit with. And that was when God again intervened in my life. There was a young man that had started joining our group at lunchtime. And I'd known him. We lived in the same neighborhood, 4 or 5 blocks from each other. I'd always thought he was a nice guy. And he would notice that I wasn't sitting with the group anymore, and I was sitting by myself. And so he got up and he sat down and he would have lunch with me. Started talking and developing a relationship. And that young man became my husband 6-7 years later. His name was Chuck. And we were the epitome of Barbie and Ken. We were a love story that so many people watched through junior high and into high school and beyond. We would go to our reunions and literally people would walk up to us and say, "The people I wanted to see tonight were you." Because I knew if I came and the two of you were still strong, still in love, fighting the fight together, that I knew everything was okay in the world and I could go back and I could deal with whatever it was that I was dealing with. And so that was a huge encouragement to us. But here we were, just two 15-year-olds hanging out, having lunch together. And I asked him, I said, why are you leaving the group? Why aren't you just, hanging out with them? And he said, well, I joined the group because I wanted to get to know you. You're not sitting with the group anymore, so why should I be sitting with the group anymore? God was always there. He was in the background. He was making sure that I wasn't gonna fall. Yeah, things were tough. Yeah, they weren't fun. Yeah, I asked why. As we did our Creaster thing, I remember distinctly going to Easter services with my mom and my dad. My brothers didn't go, but we went. And on the way back, sitting in the back of the car, I just started weeping. And they asked, you okay? Is everything all right? And I said, yeah, I don't understand why God would allow this to happen. What's the meaning of this? What's the purpose? Why am I experiencing this pain right now? I'm sure it floored both of them because they had no they had no answers for me. My love story was lived out by God through this wonderful man that he brought into my life. And Chuck and I journeyed high school, college, got engaged halfway through our junior year, and then got married during the Christmas break of our senior year in college, because we had friends that were international students, and we were afraid that if we waited till the end of school, they would end up going home and they wouldn't be able to be part of our celebration. So we got married right there in the middle of our senior year while everybody was still around on break, and that started a whole new adventure. Fast forward several years. Married life, you go through your ups and downs. We had the standard things that everybody else does. We held on to God through all of that. We asked the Lord to bless our marriage. We got baptized together while we were in school, in college. And that for us made all the difference in the world, was putting God first. We're blessed with two amazing children. Rachel was born first, and then came Chase. They're both just the light of our lives. Just bring us so much joy to this day. 28 amazing years of marriage. Today, as I'm recording this, actually should be Chuck's 58th birthday, but the Lord called him home. It's hard to say goodbye, but again, God was there all the way through. Backing up just a touch, Christmas Eve 2011, my mom went home to be with the Lord. She collapsed, was not able to be revived. Heart issues run on her side of the family. I had dealt with grief and the loss of a parent approximately 2 years before the loss of my spouse and the current love of my life. Chuck was a pastor. He was on sabbatical. We had just celebrated his 50th birthday, and everybody was so very, very excited. 2 months later, we opened and occupied a new building at our church, which he was the executive pastor in charge of the building, the fundraising, all of the administrative type things, with such a joy in his heart that each and every morning, he never went to work. He went to go do what he knew that God had been grooming him to do, to use his skills to build the kingdom. He had earned a well-deserved sabbatical, drove him to the airport, and he went on a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Israel. He traveled with his mother, who's a university professor. She was invited to speak at the university in Bethlehem, and wanted to take him with her as his 50th birthday present. So we were just so excited. Knew, of course, we were all going to miss him terribly. He had just bought me a brand new little iPad mini, so we were FaceTiming back and forth every evening. He was telling me of all of his adventures, sending pictures back and forth, and it was just an amazing trip. The last morning that we spoke, or morning for me, he began to have a little bit of a cough. And I thought, oh, baby, okay? And he goes, yeah, that's weird. I don't know where that came from. But they were doing a demonstration in Jerusalem, which was where he was at the time, that they had been lighting bonfires all around the city. And so there was a lot of smoke. And I noticed in the background that the window for the hotel that they were in was open. And I said, well, honey, is the smoke coming in from the bonfires? And he turned over his shoulder and he goes, you're so smart. He said, that's probably what it is. Reached over, shut the window, and we continued our conversation. A couple of more times he'd let out just a little, a little cough. Just didn't think anything of it. Neither of us did. He was looking forward to the next day. It was really the highlight of the trip, something that we had talked about from the very beginning before he ever even left. One of the greatest things that Chuck wanted to do was to be able to visit the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem while he was there. And he wanted to specifically go to the wall and ask the Lord, what's next? He told me he felt he had 2 more buildings in him. Didn't know if that would be in Vegas or if the Lord would call us to another location to help another church, either with a first building or secondary building. And then he felt that after that, maybe he would quasi-retire, teach as professor at a university and help business majors to understand that their gifting can be used to further God's kingdom. We were talking about our 10-year plans before he took off and what shape those might take. And so this last conversation that he and I had via FaceTime was on the eve of him getting ready to go to the wall. And we were just excited, couldn't wait. After that, he was going to head down to the Dead Sea. He was excited about the discovery of the scrolls in the area, and on and on. There were just so many things. Visiting David's tomb, a lot of things that were planned for that particular day. He bade me good night. I said, I'll have a great day as I headed off to work to do the things that I needed to do. That was that for that day. We'll touch base again the following morning. So I went off to work, did my day. The kids went off to school. Rachel was in college back in California, and everything was proceeding as, as normal as any other day. So got home, homework, dinner, all of that kind of thing, prayers, off to bed. And then at 4 a.m, I was awakened by a phone call. I picked up the phone, and it was my mother-in-law on the other end of the line. And she was stammering, having a hard time putting the words together. Obviously something was wrong. She starts going through the day as to what was happening, and that they'd gotten on a tour bus and they were on their way to the wall, and that they'd been walking and they'd gone to David's tomb, and Chuck was coughing more, and she asked if he wanted to go see somebody, and on and on and on. And as I'm sure you're basically very much the same part as I was at. I was like, Mom, stop. Is he okay? Is he okay? Because she went through the story about how they got to the wall. And the wall, if you've never been there, is separated into 2 segments. There's a line down, a divider that's down the center, where there's one section that the men will go and pray, and there's another section that's for the women. So they had to split apart, and Chuck had given her his backpack, and they said, okay, we'll meet back here at a certain time. They split off. And she went, she said her prayers, she came back to the meeting location, and he hadn't come back yet. Now, we all know from years of being with Chuck that he can pray for a long period of time. Often with prayers before Thanksgiving meals or other things, he would be cautioned by some family members, we don't want the food to get cold, but we would like for you to bless the food. Because once he started communing with the Lord, time stood still, it didn't matter. So she knew this, so she waited and was wondering when her son would be coming back from his prayers and his time with the Lord at the wall. And then the next thing she heard was an ambulance. And people were talking about something had happened. And she was just as confused as everybody else. But then as time went on, she got more and more concerned. And so she began to try to find out what had happened and what was going on, and found out that the ambulance was for her son. So Chuck went to the wall and began his prayers. And from what I've been told by people in Israel, the information that was gathered from witnesses and others, that he had begun praying, kind of pitched forward a bit, and the men that were around him asked, if he was okay, and he said he was fine. And he began praying again, and the second time he apparently fell backwards, and then that's when they knew that there was something that was very wrong. And so they called an ambulance, and he was picked up, and he was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. And again, in a moment, my whole world changed, and I almost didn't know what to do. So the next thing I did is I reached out to our pastor. It was getting close to the time that my son would be getting up and needing to go to school. And I didn't want to wake him any sooner than I'd have to. Who would? Not on the morning that the first thing you're going to hear is that your dad's with Jesus and that he's not coming home anymore. For a 15-year-old boy, it's a hard thing to take. I went in, I woke him up, told him what had happened, and we just sat there on his bed holding each other, just not quite sure what else to do. And it was just kind of like, okay, how do we tell Rachel? She's in college, the entire state away. I think I said something that was somewhat unexpected. He had asked, okay, so who do we call next? And I said, no one. And he kind of looked at me like, okay, do you want me to make some calls? And I said, no. I said, I'll make them, but I need to be ready for that, because the moment I begin making the calls is the moment I have to accept that what's happened is real. And right now, I'm just taking a few more moments to enjoy the fact that I have and carry this tremendous burden. And I know as soon as I share it, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for everybody. So we decided with Rachel, the thing to do was to have people again around her. Fortunately, she was going to a university that was near the first church that Chuck had worked at. And we had lived in the area for 9 years. And so I called a friend and told her what was going on. And I said, I need you there when I tell Rachel, because she is going to need to have somebody with skin on to hold on to. And so she was like, I will be honored. And so she and her son, they were all there. They leaned in, hugged and cried, and I need to get her home. So again, reached out to a friend who worked for the airlines. And I said, what do I do? And she said, no problem, I will take care of it. She not only flew Rachel home, but she put my girlfriend on a round trip so that she could fly back with Rachel and be there with her. And I will forever be grateful to her for that. 5 years later, she too went home with the Lord. Just how God puts these different people into your life. Sometimes it's just for a season. Sometimes it's for a lifetime. And if you all know the Lord, it's for eternity. You may come in and out, you may move, but having that connection and that relationship with God, your friendship never ends. It goes on and on. Your relationships never end. So with the loss of Chuck, started a whole new journey. He died on March 3rd, 2014. 15 days later, I turned 50. But I've been blessed with this amazing man who literally walked a life with me from 15 until almost 50. And we had no regrets, loved every moment of it. But now I had a new direction, new everything was new. I was used to having the jobs that I did at home and the jobs that Chuck did at home. Now they all fell on me or Chase. We had to refigure what was our new normal. I'd had another girlfriend who'd lost her husband 5 months prior to Chuck's passing. And because of the fact that we were both now widows, God brought us together and we became very, very good friends. We decided about a year after Chuck passed, there was a program called Grief Share that was being started at our church, that we would go through that together. It was a wonderful blessing for both of us. It helped give us tools, other people going through similar things, not necessarily the loss of a spouse, but going through grief, going through loss. And what does that look like? It's so hard because that was not God's plan. When you go back and you look through scripture and you look at Genesis and God's creation, death was not part of it. Death was a consequence of sin coming into this world. So we coming into this world following the original sin, death is part of life. Death is part of our journey. But grief and loss is not something that is easy for us to deal with. And I think that's partly because it's not the original plan. So I had to spend a lot of time studying, listening, pouring my heart out to God. On the one hand, thanking God for the huge blessing of the life that I had experienced, the love that I had experienced, and all of the things that came with that. But oh, don't bring me, I don't want to feel this again. This attached to. And those were honest, gut-wrenching feelings. And you know what? God wanted to hear that. God could take it. He could take my brokenness. He could take my anger. He could take my disappointment and all of, my plans. Are you hearing a pattern here? That was also part of my journey. Whose life was it really? Was it my life? Or was it God's life? I'd given my life to God back when I was 14. Was I now going to take it back just because things didn't go the way I wanted them to go? Absolutely not. A few months later, I remember another tearful conversation. And I said, you know what, Lord, I get it. I get it. I know in my humanness, my selfishness, I cried out and I'd said, I was willing to do whatever you wanted me to do. Go wherever you wanted me to go. And one day I realized I had never been alone. He was always there. He was there before I even knew that he was there. And he was there at that moment. He was there on all those nights. Those dark times. He was there through all of it. And little did I know, he still had plans for my life. For the next few months, I've been one person that God had kept running me into. I went on a mission trip the summer after Chuck had passed. We'd sponsored a couple of kids in Ecuador. I got invited as a last minute add-on to attend, and I asked if I could bring Rachel. The answer was yes. So she and I went on this trip, and on the last meeting before the trip took off, as we were introducing ourselves around the room, it got to this one particular gentleman, and he said his name, and I sat up. I was like, wait, I know that name. I know who that is. Because Bill is involved in sand and gravel and construction, trucking, many other different things here in Las Vegas, has been for a number of years. And I remember Chuck coming home talking about having met with and talked with this guy who's in the gravel business, and that he's going to be helping provide a lot of the decorative rock and the different things that were going on with the building. And I was like, oh, this is wonderful. I know this name, so I can go by and, say hi later. And because obviously he was a friend. So during that trip, we spoke several times. But at the end of that particular meeting, one of the things that had been shared was that the project that we were supposed to do, we were going to build a playground for these kids in Las Lagunas, where the two that Chuck and I sponsored were living. And because of all of the last minute changes and people having to drop out on the travel plans and things, there was no longer any money left in the ministry fund to be able to fund the playground. I couldn't tell you what was happening. I was in, Chuck wants a playground for his babies. How am I going to do this? If I leave this meeting without figuring out how to fix this, I'm going to be disobedient. I can't do that. And the meeting was over. Look over to my left, and Bill is still sitting. He's on his phone answering probably something to do with, his companies. And I just took a deep breath because, again, Chuck wants a playground for his babies. And I looked over at Bill and I was like, Bill. He looked up and I said, about this playground, if I put in $250, would you put in $250? And then we ask Amy, who's our team lead, to send out an email and challenge the rest of the group to come up with the other $250, and then we build this playground. What do you think? We flew off the next morning to Ecuador to build that playground for Chuck's babies. in the midst of all of that, it was a blessing. Continued through. Another year passes. Another trip to Ecuador was made by Bill. I didn't go. He's been going every year since 2013. But I kept running into him in the lobby at church. I was doing some grief counseling at a counseling center. I came out one day and there was Bill in the lobby because he was meeting with one of the other counselors who's a board member for a school that he's starting. And it was just odd everywhere I turned. The next time I run into Bill, the kids and I are going into church. He's coming out with a whole bunch of people and they're obviously dressed for hiking. And I'm like, where are you going? I want to go. My home is lovely, but I feel the walls are coming in. I need to get out. I need to be interacting with other single people. Love hiking. I love the outdoors. Can I join you guys? And Bill called me up one night. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because that was youth night. I just dropped off Chase at youth group. And he asked, are you doing anything? And he said, well, I want to ask you something, but I didn't want to ask over the phone. Can we meet for coffee? And I was like, is everything okay? And he goes, yeah. I just want to see you in person. I'm like, okay. So we met at a local Starbucks and he proceeds to tell me that his company Christmas party is coming up. And for the last 5 years, he'd been going by himself and wanted to see if I was available. And I said, well, sure. It was a lot of fun. I'd learned so much about his company being there and was just really impressed with it not just being about business, it being about outreach. They have a charity that they sponsor every year. The employees are encouraged to volunteer their own time and they have different rewards that they get from the company. Really, it's helping people to understand that their lives impact so many others in so many different ways. And I just loved that idea. But a new challenge came up. The photographer came by and was taking pictures of all the couples at the table. A deep breath. It's just a picture. It's okay. So I'm like, okay, it's okay. And so they get to us and, and they're kind of like, lean in, and I'm like, oh, okay. And so I lean in, Bill puts his arm around me. I put my hand up, touch his hand. We smile, they take the picture. And in one moment, our lives changed. Called me again another day or two later, talk about some of his journey. And then he said something that I thought was so very sweet. It was that he said he wanted to be able to hold my hand. Because that night when I leaned in and I reached up to touch his hand for that photo, he felt something. And he hadn't felt that in a long time. He said, I'd like to hold your hand. And so I said, well, okay, hold my hand. And he goes, no, you don't understand. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people very badly. And I've put boundaries on any type of interaction with people of the opposite sex because of the mistakes that I've made. So for me to be able to hold your hand, we would have to be dating. And for us to be dating, I need to be able to tell you about my past. And so we agreed that night to set up a real date where he would have the opportunity to tell me his journey, where he's at in his life. We did that, we met, and as I have often reflected on that evening, he opened the junk drawer, burst open the skeleton cabinet, threw all of it onto the tabletop, and then said, do you want to run now? And I kind of giggled and I went, well, it's a lot to process, but no, I don't want to run. Thus began a new journey that God was having both of us on. We started every morning, we began a Bible study. We went through experiencing God, often sharing meals after our work shifts and things were done. We would pray together at night, continued to go on hikes, just seeing what God was up to. Fast forward a little bit, we've now been married for 5 years. God brought two broken people through their pain to a point of health. And then to a point of exploring what life could be like together, pursuing God. So the last 5 years have been a huge, huge adventure. The morning that I walked down the aisle and I said, I do, I immediately became the mother of 6 rather than 2, and the grandmother of 2. I am now the proud mother of 6 and the proud grandmother of 5 plus 2 more step-grandchildren. Life has been so exciting. God is doing so many things through Bill and I as a couple, through ministry. We've had a huge privilege of starting a Christian school here on the southeast side of the Las Vegas Valley, Capstone Christian Academy. We opened our doors right before Memorial Day weekend. We are working very hard and diligently on creating a middle and high school campus for our current 2nd graders to be able to matriculate up to in another short 4 years. God's not done. We may think sometimes that the road that we're on, the circumstances that we're dealing with, whether it's our health, the loss of mobility, whether it's the loss of life, whether it's the loss of a marriage, friendships. There's so much that happens in and through one person's life. But if you hold on to Jesus, hold on to who it is that you have claimed as Lord and Savior, He will, by His word, make all things good according to His purposes. Now, do I think the things that happened individually were good? Absolutely not. Would I have chosen to contract a disease that would never allow me to run again? Absolutely not. Would I have chosen to lose anybody that I love? Absolutely not. But would I choose to walk away from God because things didn't go the way I wanted them to? Absolutely not. God has been the one constant, the companion that has walked with me through all of my faults and foibles. He's not done with me yet. I have victory, but I still have things that He and I talk about, I laugh about, and I say, oh, you have so much patience for me. There's so many things that I have to be joyful for, grateful for, thankful for, that I couldn't even list them all. I wouldn't trade one moment of it, because it's God's story through me. Thanks for letting me share.